Welcome to another introduction video of TEST.easy. In this video I'll give you a brief overview over our test automation tool for SAP. My name is Lucas Briel and I'm a developer at TEST.easy. If you are new to TEST.easy, I recommend you check out our previous videos. I assume by now you know how to create, configure and execute a test case with a test object and a result model. In this video, we will continue working on the example case we've been building up in the previous videos. The validation method we've been using so far is called rule-based validation. We manually defined specific rules for certain fields in order to determine whether the test passed or failed. In large test cases, where a lot of data needs to be validated, it can become tedious to define those rules manually. Therefore, TEST.easy provides another validation method, the database validation. Instead of defining validation rules, you just execute your test case in a special mode and thus create a reference run that serves as a template that every subsequent test run is validated against. Using the database validation, the complete output of the current run is compared against the reference run's output. If it deviates from the reference, the test run is marked as failed. In an earlier video, we built a test case that creates a new document and validates its amounts using a database model as a result object. Here we see the validation rules we manually defined for the amount and the debit-credit indicator field. In this video, we want to validate all of the document's data, and we obviously want to avoid the effort to define validation rules for each and every field. So instead, we are going to use the database validation. We'll create a new test case within our existing scenario, and as usual, provide a fitting description. And when we look to the far right, we can see the field validation method with a default value rule-based. We're going to change that to data-based. Fortunately, we already have an adequate interface that allows us to validate the document, the database model we created in an earlier video. We can reuse that as the test object of our new test case. Just a quick reminder. The database model provides us with the hierarchical interface of the relevant database tables, BKPF, which holds the document's header data, and BSEG, containing the data of each line item. We need to generate the interface. The database model doesn't provide any default configuration, which is why the configuration area is empty. Remember how we configured the database model in the test case above. We provided the document's unique table key consisting of the fiscal year, the document number and the company code, in order to select the right document that was created just moments ago by the test object. Well, here we do exactly the same. Opening the field configuration, we navigate to the input section and deeper into the document header. Now we simply reuse our three scenario parameters, which will still contain the values from the previous test case. We assign each parameter to the respective header field. The database model now knows exactly which data to select, and we are already set to create a reference run. But before we do that, there are two more things I want to show you. First, how to exclude certain fields from the database validation. Every test run we execute will create and post a new document with a different document number. While we want the database validation to compare almost all fields against the reference, there is no useful information in comparing the document number of a new document to the one of an older document, because we expect them to be different each time. In order to exclude those fields, we simply add a certain validation rule to them. We are currently still in the input section, so first we need to navigate to the output section before we can define any validation rules. This is the AnyValue rule. This validation rule will always pass, because no matter which validation method is used, it allows for any value, even empty values. That means that when using the database validation method, these fields are excluded from the comparison to the reference. The document number also occurs in the line items, so we need to exclude that field on the lower level as well. One more thing we have to consider is that the database model will return not only the document header, but also the table of the document's line items. In our case, we always expect two line items, one on the debit side and one on the credit side. How does TEST.easy make sure that each table line gets compared to the correct table line in the reference data? By default, TEST.easy will try an index-based approach, meaning it will try to compare the first table line with the first of the reference data and the second with the second, and so on. While that may be sufficient in many cases, a more robust approach would not depend on line items coming out in the right order. Therefore, TEST.easy lets us define table keys to make sure the right table lines get compared with each other. Those comparison keys don't have to coincide with the database keys of that table. However, they should be unique within their table. In order to do that, we just need to define the key fields in the group condition dialog of that table. In our case, we want to make sure the debit side is compared to the debit side and credit to credit. Therefore, the debit credit indicator field is a fitting choice for the table key. Here, the list of all key fields is displayed. You can see that we didn't define any key fields for the upper level for the document header. That's not necessary, because we always select exactly one document header by providing the unique table key composed of these three fields. After saving our changes to the scenario configuration, we jump to the according test set via the usage list. We proceed by clicking the Run button, and we can see one flag called Save Output. With this flag set, instead of validating the output, TEST.easy will save the output data for later reference. In the resulting run protocol, we see that our new test case was successfully executed. When we look into the protocol tree, we see that each and every field of our database model is listed. We did not define any reference yet that this data could be validated against, and we executed this test run in the Save Output mode. So this is just to review the output data. By reviewing the column of actual values, we are able to check if the output data is correct and whether we want to use it as a reference for future runs. We have a document with two line items posting the same amount into the same account on both the debit and the credit side. Looks good. So let's define this as our reference. Going back to our scenario, this button lets you define the reference run. It opens up a search help showing you all of this test case's runs where the output data was saved. We'll select the one we just created and checked. In the test case area, the selected reference run number and case number are displayed right here. Now we need to save the changes, and then we are going to execute another test run. But this time without the option to save the output data, because this time we want the test case to actually be validated. Our test run failed. Let's have a look into the protocol tree. We see that the document number is listed, but the asterisk shows us that it wasn't compared to the reference. However, there are still some fields that deviate from the reference run. Different documents have different times they were entered at. The date might be still the same as the one in the reference, but when I run this test tomorrow, that will also change. Further down, we find another deviation, the object key, which is the unique database key for the document. Scrolling down to the line items, Note that the number of table lines is also compared to the reference, which you can check under the cardinality node. Within the line item, we find the object key again. So back to the scenario configuration to define a couple of more rules. For the entered on field, which is the entering date of the document, the entered at, which is the exact timestamp, and the object key, which just as the document number will always be different. And in the items section, we have the object key field again. After saving our changes, we'll run the test again. This time the test was successful. Opening the protocol tree, we can see that the excluded fields are still listed, but the asterisk in the column expected tells you that the actual value was not compared to the reference. Scrolling down to line items, we can see the table keys that were used to match up the right table lines for comparison. That concludes our video, and I hope I was able to give you some new insight into TEST.easy and its data-based validation method.